Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for those of you who are joining us from Maggie Cordova and Vista Grande Elementary and Rio Rancho Elementary as well. We're excited that you're all going to spend a few minutes with us to study strategies for building strong intermediate readers. So we're excited for this opportunity, and we can't wait to get started. This is Elizabeth Hockamy, and I'm in the Curriculum and Instruction Department at Rio Rancho Public Schools. And I'm very excited about this opportunity to partner with the Public Consulting Group to offer you all this professional learning opportunity. I'd like to introduce our facilitator today. Please help me welcome Dr. Tabitha Dodson. She is a senior associate at PCG Consulting, and she supports the implementation and professional learning focused on curriculum, assessment, instruction, and leadership development for educational entities across the K-12 spectrum. And before Tabitha joined PCG, she has had extensive experience working at the higher education level and also in early childhood classrooms and as a Title I teacher, studying and helping prepare teachers to be reading teachers. And so Tabitha has experience as a clinical assistant professor of special education at the University of Florida. She's also worked as a national education consultant for collaborative classrooms. Tabitha was an assistant professor of reading education, focusing on early reading. She has published articles in journals such as the Reading Teacher and the Journal of Literacy Research. And so she comes to us with a wealth of information, and we are excited to not only connect what she knows about early reading instruction, but also how that connects to our instruction in our classrooms and our instructional materials around the ReadyGen curriculum. So with all of that being said, please help me welcome Dr. Dobson, and I will turn it over.
Thank you so much for that, Elizabeth. I appreciate that. And thank you all for allowing me to spend the next hour or so with you talking about building strong intermediate readers. I know it's the end of your day and you have a lot of things that you could be doing, and I really appreciate that you are taking time to be lifelong learners and always continuing to grow together. In today's session, we're going to focus on making meaning from text, especially related to effective vocabulary instruction. The research and the ideas that we're going to be talking about today are going to be based on Marzano and Pickering, as well as Hybert, Beck, by Miller, and others. Today, we're going to focus on supporting all students to be able to access grade level text by teaching strategies that will promote their academic language, vocabulary, and understanding of complex grade level text. These strategies we can teach during core or we could teach during intervention, either way. So just housekeeping, I know we've already asked you to mute yourselves because you're in different locations and the background noise becomes overwhelming. So it can't be quite as interactive as I would like it to be in this setting, but if you have questions, please locate your chat box, and you can put questions in the chat box, and we'll try to answer them at the end of the webinar rather than stopping in the middle. So just, you can go ahead and type them in the chat box at any time, and we'll circle back to them at the end. This is our agenda for today. We're going to be spending a few minutes at the start just thinking about the issues and the solutions around making meaning from text, and we're going to look a little bit about what the research tells us. We'll look at effective methods for teaching vocabulary and helping to ensure that these words become a permanent part of our students' vocabulary. We'll also be looking at effective independent vocabulary learning strategies. Finally, we'll think about background knowledge and ways to help students understand complex text. I also want to mention here that an hour goes by very quickly, and we probably have more content here than we can get through, but I don't want you to worry. We will be sharing everything with you. we just realized that we shared, Elizabeth, with you a PowerPoint that was not the final PowerPoint. And so we're going to share with you the final PowerPoint so that you'll have that you can share with everyone. That way, in addition to the viewing guide and what we do here together today, you can have access to all of that information for your future use and for you to circle back to. So when we think about effective instruction, we always want to start with the standards and planning with the standards at the beginning. Today, our focus is going to be really on cluster 3 of vocabulary acquisition. We know that students need to be able to determine and clarify the meanings of unknown and multiple meaning words and phrases using context clues, analyzing meaningful word parts, and consulting general and specialized reference materials. Oh, I'm clicking the wrong thing. We also know that these standards get increasingly complex as we get higher in the grade levels, and our expectations for complexity of text increases as well. So the challenges only get more and more sophisticated as we go from 3rd, 4th, and 5th grades. We know that vocabulary acquisition is crucial if students are going to make meaning from text. So what are some of the issues? We know that comprehension is directly related to vocabulary knowledge. We also know that students who live in poverty frequently have a fraction of the vocabulary of students who are in higher income households. In fact, students coming into kindergarten from high poverty households often have half the vocabulary of their high SES counterparts. We also have to ensure that we accelerate the vocabulary acquisition of all of our students, because we know that to comprehend, we must not only be able to decode 95% of the words, but we also need to be able to understand 95% of the words that we read. Now, way back in 1995, there was a huge study that was published in a seminal book by Hart and Risley, and you've probably seen it referenced many times. These researchers did a longitudinal study of vocabulary acquisition in young children, and they conducted the study with families over 3 years. And looking at families, they grouped these families into very low-income families that were living on welfare, and working-class parents who were, more blue-collar, and professional families. And what they found is that the children's vocabulary skills were directly linked to their economic backgrounds. So simply in the number of words heard, the average child living in poverty was hearing half as many words per hour as the average working class child, and less than 1/3 of the average child in a professional family. Now, if we look at the chart here on this graph from Hirsch, we see that the gap for children entering kindergarten with low oral language skills continues to grow throughout their school years, often widening to over 5 years difference between the children who entered kindergarten with high oral language skills and the children who entered kindergarten with low oral language skills. So, of course, preschool and before they ever come to us in kindergarten is critically important, but for what we're going to talk about here today in grades 3 through 5, it's a big challenge for us, because we need to build students' vocabulary in elementary school, especially for those children who come to us with lower socioeconomic background. In order to close this vocabulary gap, we really have to think about not only just teaching vocabulary at a regular rate, but we really have to accelerate the vocabulary acquisition of these kids who come to us already with vocabulary lower than their higher SES peers. Some more issues. I want to read this slide for a second so we can just really think about it. To comprehend text, students require both fluent word recognition skills and an average or greater vocabulary. Miller tells us that the presence of these two accomplishments does not guarantee a high level of reading comprehension, but the absence of either word recognition or adequate vocabulary ensures a low level of reading comprehension. So we have to think about these two things for a minute. In the first webinar, the focus was on that word reading automaticity and making every word a sight word. And in this webinar, we're going to focus on the other aspect, vocabulary. More issues. The vocabulary for English language learners. Vocabulary development is crucial for our English learners. Poor vocabulary is a very serious issue. Findings indicate that research-based strategies that we use with our English-only students are also effective with our English language learners. Of course, we want to adapt these based on our kids and adapt them based on their strengths and their needs, and also take advantage of their first language. We'll talk later more about cognates and how we can take advantage of those, especially for our Spanish-speaking English language learners. We'll also talk more about review and more reinforcement for our English learners. So what can we do? We know that we need to really have a deep understanding of the research and ensure that our students possess wide, extensive vocabulary knowledge so that they're able to really become ferocious readers of grade level text. And when we think particularly about intermediate students that all of you teach, we already talked about that vocabulary knowledge is a strong indicator of student success, but Stahl tells us that vocabulary knowledge is knowledge. The knowledge of a word not only implies a definition, but it also implies how the word fits into the world. So it's really, this is how we know what we know. Vocabulary knowledge is knowledge. The third bullet here is also critical. Students in third grade and beyond need to learn 2,000 to 3,000 new words each year. That's 6 to 8 words per day. So we know that we can't teach 6 to 8 words per day. But vocabulary is acquired incidentally through indirect exposure to words and intentionally through explicit instruction. So we need to think about both of those things today. We also would be thinking about how we help kids become word conscious and teach them generative studies so that they can apply what they know to unknown vocabulary while they're reading. So in the first webinar, you really reviewed the elements of effective instruction. And as we explore the instructional routines today, I want you just to keep these things in mind. We're not going to go over them again, but you did it in detail last time. I also want you to remember that your ReadyGen lessons are designed with this gradual release of responsibility model, and there's always the goal of building independent readers and writers. And although we're not digging deep into the ReadyGen lessons today, we will highlight a few things about them, and I know you have great resources to help you go back and implement these with your ReadyGen resources. So let's start and pause for a minute and think about our kiddos and think about those students you have who read and read often. And turn to page 1 in your viewing guide and take a minute and jot down your thoughts about these students. What do you know about students who read and read often? Go ahead and talk to a partner about your thoughts that you jotted down. So let's go ahead and come back together. Any discussion that you have about vocabulary really has to include that we have to make kids readers. We must include the need to help kids learn to love reading, how to become voracious readers. Everything that kids do while they're reading helps improve their literacy, whether we're talking about vocabulary, background knowledge, decoding, fluency, comprehension, writing. And we've all seen these charts and graphs and memes that show that children who read even 10 minutes a day outside of school experience substantially higher levels of vocabulary growth between 2nd and 5th grade than children who do little or no reading. We also know, however, that many of our children don't read outside of school. So we have to really think about how we're going to really prioritize that in our school. So it's imperative that if kids are not reading outside of school, we have to, while encourage them to do it outside of school, also make sure that we're providing time for students to read while they are in school. Getting kids to love reading so that they read widely and read a lot is really the first step in helping improve vocabulary and comprehension. So when we think about making kids readers, reading and vocabulary have a reciprocal, if I can say the word, a reciprocal relationship. The more we read, the bigger our vocabulary becomes. The bigger our vocabulary becomes, the more we understand and enjoy reading, so we read more, and so on. It's those Matthew effects that we've heard of before, where the rich get richer, the kids who read more get larger vocabularies, they enjoy it more, and so on. We want kids to be reading independently, and this also includes us reading to children. It's a great way to increase vocabulary for children by reading to them, especially reading to them read alouds that are above their independent level and also above their vocabulary level, so that we're really introducing them to new and different vocabulary words. So let's take another minute and think about how you encourage students to become readers. If you look on page 2 of your viewing guide, you'll see another place to jot some notes of the ways you encourage students to read deeply and to read volume. So go ahead and take just about 30 seconds and jot down some things that am I on the wrong page? No, that's right, page 2, that you're currently doing to encourage students to become readers, and then talk to your partner about the ways that they might be doing those things the same or some different things. Take about a minute between those two things. So let's go ahead and come back together. I wish that we had more time so that we could share some of our great ideas with each other, and hopefully you were able to learn some things from the people there that you are with. I'm sure you have a lot of great ideas that you are already implementing, and some of them might be on this slide, but some things that we for sure want to think about are classroom libraries, school-wide and classroom book consciousness, and the role of the media center. So we know from the work of Allington that higher achieving schools have more books in classroom libraries than were found in lower achieving schools. I don't think this is an accident. We need to make sure that our kids have access to lots and lots of books. For school-wide and classroom book consciousness, we want to think about ways to get kids really hooked on books. And we're going to talk about some of these things a little bit more, like the book pass, and hooking them on series and the role of the media center. We know other work from Allington also told us that higher achieving schools have greater book circulation in their media center than in lower achieving schools. Hopefully all of you have great media centers and also great media specialists. I unfortunately have been in schools recently that a couple of different things. One, either they don't have very many books or they have very old books in their media center, or what's been more common recently, I've seen some schools that have just great media centers with fantastic books, and even have had, great influx of books in the recent years that are just new and fabulous, but they don't have media specialists, so there are no books being circulated in those schools. And so the role of the media center has been shown to be really crucial, and so something we need to make sure that we prioritize. The book pass idea that was on the previous slide is a really great way to just introduce kids to a lot of books in your classroom library in a short amount of time. And this is on page 3 in your viewing guide. And it's a great way for kids to spend just a couple of minutes with some books and think about what might excite them about some of the books that they've seen. So it's really easy to implement. You just group your students in teams of 4 or 5 or whatever works for you in your particular situation. And a stack of books from your classroom library, or if you don't have a great classroom library, then from the media center or from the public library, wherever you can get books and get your hands on them. And we're going to do this just real quickly. We have this this chart for kids to fill out, and they're going to just jot down the name of the book and the author. And we're going to just spend 1 minute looking at that book. We're going to look at the cover. We're going to look at the table of contents, if there is one. We're going to read the back, and then we're going to start reading the book. And we're going to think about if this word is just right for us, if it's too hard, or if it's too easy. And after a minute, we're going to stop and have children think about their reaction to the book. Do they want to read it? Do they maybe want to read it? Do they not want to read it? And so it just gives, and then we're going to pass those books along. And we're going to do this. We think about this if we do just a minute at a time, or if your kids need a little more time, maybe you're doing 90 seconds or 2 minutes. But we teach kids that this is really what we do when we go look for a book that we want to read. We don't just pick a book off the shelf and read it. We look at all of these elements and decide all of these things. And so we're teaching them the habits of what good readers do, but we're also exposing them to a lot of the books in your classroom library and really helping them see what they might want to go back and read when they have time to. And you can do this, maybe you have 5 minutes here or you have an extra 2 minutes there, however much time you have to do it, but just really getting kids involved in your classroom library. We also want to think about the school culture, your entire school beyond just your classroom. What does the school look like that is focused on creating a reading culture? And this might be teachers recommending books, family reading contests, always highlighting books wherever it is in the school, family reading nights, bulletin boards that highlight books. We also want, we can be recommending books to kids. We can get other teachers' recommendations for books. It's a great idea to introduce kids to series or to authors. I know many of my kids got really inspired by series books, and sometimes teachers have some trepidation as the kids get stuck in a series, but I think anything that gets kids excited and want to read is fantastic, and then we can maybe encourage them to, supplement beyond just those series books, but whatever gets them really hooked on books is a great thing. We can also, do during our read aloud time, maybe we only read a portion of the book, get kids excited about it, make them want to go back and finish it on their own. Peer reading, we see pictured here. It could be older students reading to younger students or just peer-to-peer. Also, we can provide time for peers to recommend books to each other. So maybe when we do that book pass on the previous slide, it's not just for ourselves, but also we want to be thinking about which books might we recommend to our peers that we saw or that we read and completed. And again, time, I think, is critical here to think about. None of these matter if we don't protect time for students to actually read. We're going to create a love of books. We're going to have kids love to read. We're going to teach them to read really well by helping them learn to decode and deepen their vocabulary knowledge. And we're doing all of that so that they can read and write. And so we have to provide a lot of time that they can practice these skills and really actually read. Again, we're going to want to be encouraging these, just like here with the families, reading contests and all these things. We're going to be encouraging them to read at home, family reading nights, but we know that we have to allow that time at school so that we know this is really happening. And also so that we can be, conferring with students and talking to them and making sure that they really are understanding these books that they're reading. So moving to more in depth about vocabulary instruction, we know that in order to increase students' vocabulary, we have to provide instruction and strategies for independent word learning as well as for word consciousness. As much as we want kids to read a lot, it's not going to be enough. And here's a little chart that just highlights that a little bit that Marzano brings to us of why wide reading is critical. Vocabulary size and the amount a child reads is directly correlated, right? We've talked about that. Direct instruction cannot possibly account for the number of word meanings that children acquire. I mean, we are not going to teach kids 6 to 8 words a day and expect them to really understand them. It's going to come from other ways. So wide reading is critical, but wide reading is not enough. The context is sometimes, or here it says generally unreliable, so probably more often than not, the context is unreliable for us to infer the meanings. Also, most words occur too infrequently to provide the number of exposures needed to learn them. So the truth is they're going to learn more words from our oral language and through wide reading than we're ever going to teach them, but we also have to teach them because we have to teach them the ways to access and infer the word meanings. We have to teach them how to use strategies so that they can be generative and they can attack those unknown words that they don't know. So how do we learn words? Those things we were just talking about, really. Reading volume is critical. Our students also learn vocabulary through our classroom language, through their classroom language at home, through their home language, not the classroom language, just like we saw in that earlier study. Language-rich read-alouds. And again, we have to provide direct, explicit instruction, repetition, multiple exposures. Stahl cautioned us against the mere repetition of drill of the word. We used to always just emphasize the word and the definition, and we know that that's not effective. Students need lots of opportunities to encounter the words repeatedly and in a variety of contexts. And then we also need to think about that generative word work. It's crucial when active engagement that really goes beyond the definitional knowledge, and that generative work when students not only know a word, they know the word's definition, its logical relationship with other words. They also know how the word functions in different contexts, its morphemic roots, affixes, and cognates. So all of these things are the way that kids are going to be learning words in our classrooms and outside of our classrooms. When we think about learning new words, we learn through indirect instruction, like we said, language-rich classrooms, read-alouds, independent reading, language, wordplay, experiences, and we learn through direct instruction. Before reading, point of encounter, and after reading, word learning strategies, word walls, word sorts, word families, again, that morphemic analysis and multiple exposure. Today, we're going to focus more on this side, the direct instruction. Explicit instruction is specifically on we're going to focus on specifically on selecting words because that's really critical. We need to think about which words we're going to emphasize and how we're going to provide opportunities to use language in which new vocabulary knowledge is embedded, conversations, discussions, topics, and texts. So we want kids to really be not only just reading these words, we want them to own them. We want them to read them, to write them, to talk about them, to discuss them, to use them in context and out of context into another context so that they really own these words. This kind of really explicit instruction is really paramount for our kids. And it's especially important for English learners and students who have difficulties with language and literacy. We really need to accelerate the learning for these students. When we think about standardized tests, we know that direct vocabulary instruction has an impact on standardized tests. Direct vocabulary instruction that's related to the content that students are learning really significantly impacts students' performance on the standardized test. So we want to think about making sure that our vocabulary that we're teaching kids comes from the context of their reading materials or their content area materials. So we want to really think about, research tells us that direct instruction of vocabulary can influence student achievement on comprehension more than any other single effort. So this is really crucial, right? We need to, we haven't always been really great teachers or really understood how to effectively teach vocabulary. I know I was guilty of that when I was still in the classroom, but we know a lot more than we used to. And we know how crucial it is with vocabulary influencing comprehension as much as 50 to 80%. If you don't know the words or the meanings of the words of something you're reading, even if you can decode them, you're not going to have comprehension, which is the whole reason we read. So when we think about all the words there are to teach it, it's overwhelming. And we know that students learn vocabulary in lots of ways that we've talked about. Now this tier system may be review to many of you, but it's important to consider how we identify words to teach among all the choices. And Isabel Back introduced us to the idea of classifying words by tiers in her book, Bringing Words to Life. And it was really a game changer for me when I first read this book. Thinking about the classification of words, because back when I was still in the classroom, we used to just go through the text and identify the most difficult words in there and the words that kids certainly wouldn't be able to read or wouldn't know the meaning, and those were the vocabulary words. But we know that wasn't the correct way to do it. When we look at the classification of tiers, Tier 1 words are considered basic vocabulary, and except for English learners or students who may have some difficulties with language, they really seldom require direct teaching. They're learned through frequent exposure and context. Words like happy and table and walk, those are considered basic Tier 1 vocabulary. Tier 2 words, this is where we really want to spend the bulk of our instruction in Tier 2. They are considered high utility. Students will have lots of opportunities to read these words and speak them in writing. We'll see them across context. In her book, Beck called these words interesting words with mileage. I always remember that sentence. It's interesting words with mileage, meaning that they make the writing more interesting, and we're going to use them a lot, and we're going to use them in a lot of different contexts. We can also think about that these are the words that are the language of more mature language users. Learning these Tier 2 words will help kids really think about expanding their vocabulary, but also being more precise and more specific. They're often more sophisticated ways for describing a known concept. For example, if I said I was ecstatic, that would be a more sophisticated or more precise way of saying that I'm just happy. I often tell students that when they use these words, they make their writing more interesting and more clear to the reader. So you think about the difference between the girl was happy when she saw her friend or the girl was ecstatic when she saw her friend. So it's that really more precise language, more sophisticated language. And Tier 2 have a lot more instructional potential because it really helps deepen and build concepts. Words such as ecstatic, stroll, section, clumsily are examples of Tier 2 words. And then when we think about Tier 3 words, these are often more technical. They're often domain specific. And but sometimes we still want to spend some time teaching these words as well. Tier 3 words may not be as useful for kids. They may not use them as often or as frequently, but it sometimes depends on what you're doing. If you're doing a whole unit on butterflies, then you're going to need to teach metamorphosis and chrysalis and those kind of things. And so it just depends on how much time you're going to spend with these. Other times you're just going to spend, you can just give them the definition and go on if this is not something that they really need to spend time learning. So let's think for a minute about how I teach the words. ReadyGen uses the term, instead of these tiers, ReadyGen uses these words such as benchmark vocabulary. These are the words that are important to understand. These are the words that are important for kids to understand within a text. The vocabulary is addressed during the reading instruction, and it can be defined as the words needed to comprehend a text. Words from other disciplines, words that are part of a semantic. I'm just making sure I'm on the right click here. Yeah, there we go. and/or morphological network, and words central to unlocking the enduring understanding of a text. I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of these concepts from your work with ReadyGen. So how do I teach these benchmark words? These are the ones I spend explicit direct instruction with and give multiple opportunities to practice. Which words do we not pre-teach and look at in context? According to ReadyGen, the words and phrases embedded in text that students can figure out from the context. And these are called the by-the-way words. And so the by-the-way words can sometimes be the sophisticated or unusual words for known concepts that can be assembling blocks for kids. We're just going to define these quickly, but instruction should not interfere with the reading. These can be addressed during close reading, and they're supported by the text for meaning. So it's a little bit different than the tier system, but you can see the similarities. So we're going to need to teach the benchmark words and just tell the by-the-way words. So let's think about it for a few minutes. Let's practice. I want you to turn to page 5 in your teaching guide and read this excerpt. And I want you to underline 3 to 4 words that you might teach. Think about and share with a partner why you might choose these words. So take about 2 to 3 minutes to read this text, choose 3 or 4 words, and share with your partner about why you made these choices. So let's go ahead and come back together. And you may have chosen different words based on your students, what they might need to know. There is no one right answer, but here are some words that you might choose. Get my clicker to work. So we might want to consider crumbling because students might not be able to decode it, and it can be taught through the concept of what are crumbs or what is something that's crumbling. So it could be used in multiple ways. We might choose accomplish. That is a more sophisticated word to represent having done something successfully or having achieved something. We might also consider geology and paleontology. Now, we might think of these as the tier 3, the domain-specific words. However, if they are important to what we are studying and the context that we're reading about, they might be important. In addition, they have morphemes that we can study. We can note that the word paleontology, it might be difficult for struggling readers, and so when they come across it, they might not even try to read it or attempt to read it. So we can show kids how we can break it down into syllables and how we can underline the vowels like we talked about during the first webinar, and thinking about reading the parts and then thinking about reading the whole. Whoops. I have something else on that slide, but I must not have gotten it on there, because I also was going to show you that we can also teach kids the morphology here. We can teach kids that ology means the study of. And so when we look at geology, geo means earth, so geology means the study of the earth, and paleo means old. So the word paleontology is the study of that which is old. So great for that generative work too, and teaching that, especially the ology, which they're going to see over and over again. So how do we teach them? We've chosen some words, and how might we teach them? And there isn't one right way, but we're going to talk about one effective instructional routine to teach these words directly and explicitly. And you might have others that you use that we really want to think about the essential evidence-based components, including really having kids engage with the word, saying the word, learning its meaning, applying the meaning, applying the word in other contexts. This particular strategy is adapted from Marzano, and so we're going to take a minute to read through this. If you'll turn to page 6 in your viewing guide, you'll see this kind of blown out a little bit, and we're going to do some practice with that with a partner here in a minute. But let's look at it here on the slide. The first step in this 6-step process is to provide a student-friendly definition, pictures and examples of the words. And in step 2, we're going to have the students restate the term in their own words. Then they're going to create non-linguistic representation. This could be images, pictographs, organizers, photos, things they find on the internet. Then we're going to have students provide, do activities so they get lots of exposure to the words and they add to their knowledge. We're going to have students discuss the terms, talk about the words, make presentations. And then in step 6, we're going to be thinking about reviewing and games and ways that help them revisit the words. And again, this is going to be really important for our English learners and for our children who maybe are struggling, or for words that just really are difficult for kids. So step 6 might be something we return to a lot, depending on the words. So take a minute and just look through this 6-step process on page 6. We're not going to do anything with it yet, but we're going to here in just a minute. Okay, so I'm going to move on. We're going to come back to that in just a second. I want to show you this. We have it on the slide here in sentences, and we have it blown out for you in the viewing guide. And then here's just a really condensed version of it. Teach the words, have students restate the words, student picture the words, student use the words, student discuss the words, and students play with and review the words. So it just kind of makes it a little bit simpler to think about what exactly I'm going to be doing in these 6 steps. Here's just a real simple version to make it concrete. Okay, so let's think about how we're going to do this. The first step when we introduce a word and have this is we're going to introduce the word and have students say the word. And this is important because we want students to be able to pronounce the word correctly. So many students, especially our English learners who may be hearing the word for the first time, may need to practice pronouncing the word several times so that they can secure it in their memory. Having them say the word provides them the opportunity to really think about the sounds and supports their phonological development. It's also important that we write the word on the board or a card so that students are reading the word out loud as they look at the word. Okay, so let's practice. I'm going to say the word, and then you're going to say it with me and do the things here that I ask for, okay? So let's practice. The word is expedition. Read the word with me. Expedition. Say the word one more time. Expedition. What's the word? Expedition. Now I'm going to circle the prefixes. Prefix here is X. Now, I might model this or I might ask for it depending on the level of my kids and how much we've done this before. So here I'm just going to circle the prefix X, and I'm going to circle the suffix shun that we've talked about before, and introduce the word by its parts. I see this medial vowel in here. It's going to be in a CVC, so it's going to be short. Ped. Now I'll read the word by parts. Expedition. Read it with me. Read the parts with me. Expedition. Let's do that one more time a little faster. Expedition. Say the word with me, expedition. Say it again, expedition, okay? So again, that's kind of a review from what you did in the first webinar. The next part, we're going to present a student-friendly definition, right? We want to explain this in everyday language so that students can really understand it. We know that when we used to have kids go look up words in the dictionary and write the definitions, that number one, they would just write the first definition, which may or may not be related to what we're talking about, and may or may not make sense, and then they would write sentences that research showed us that the majority of made no sense and certainly didn't tell us if they understood the word at all. So we've moved beyond that. We're going to provide them with a student-friendly explanation. We're not even going to make them go find it. We're going to provide it because we want to make sure they have a quick definition that was in language that they understand. So let's practice with expedition. An expedition is a journey or a voyage with a group of people, usually for a special purpose. And we also want to make sure that we are giving these or providing these words from context. Remember, we talked about that a little earlier, that we don't want to just give them a random list of words, but these words are taken from the text that they're using. So in this particular one, in their text, Spanish explorers set out an expedition to discover gold in Florida. The next step is to have students restate in their own words using specific sentence stems. So for example, we could have students use the phrases, someone who or something that. This forces students to describe it in their own terms. Plus we can add an example would be. So for this one, someone who is on an expedition would be on a journey. An example would be a group of hikers going to the top of Mount Everest. So we can tell from this that kids not only understand the word, but they're able to use it in a sentence that demonstrates understanding. We can look at these with different words. Someone who is inhospitable would make me feel very unwelcomed in their home. An example would be. Something that is done arbitrarily would be done without much thought. An example would be. So let's do a turn and talk now. We're going to be looking at page 6 in your viewing guide. Take a couple of minutes and do step 2 on page 6 of your viewing guide, where you're going to be looking at the words accomplished and crumbling. So take turns. One of you be the teacher for accomplished and one of you be the teacher for crumbling. So take just about 2 minutes to complete step 2 on page 6. So let's come back together. We're going to look at step 3. And step 3, students create some kind of non-linguistic representation. This picture representation really helps students store that information into their permanent memory, make that connection for them. Research has shown that adding these kind of pictorial representation to vocabulary terms produced an average gain in learning of 34 percentile points, so that's pretty strong. Students can draw them, use concrete items, pick things that you find online as well. Step 4 includes using the word beyond this particular lesson and across multiple contexts. So take a moment and review these activities listed on this slide. So this step can be achieved in many ways. When we think about it, the meaning of a word can be clarified through examples, non-examples, visual representations, the synonyms, antonyms. We want to really think about creating multiple contexts in which the word is used so that students see the different ways in which it can be applied and so that they actually use these later in these different contexts. If we really want students to have a deep understanding of a word and to really own that word and to use that word, we have to really provide lots of exposures in multiple contexts. And we also have to make sure that kids are really actively engaged with the word, really making sure that we provide lots of opportunities for that process and for those sort of playful interactions and opportunities so that we can see kids actually using the words. And we, as a teacher, you can also use these opportunities to monitor students' understanding of these words. Then again, we're going to provide lots of different opportunities, things, little activities, little things that we can do to help extend these. So one of the examples, and sorry, I'm not really skipping, I'm going to show them in greater detail here on the next slide. So the first one is paint chips, and I don't know if you've used these before, but it's kind of a fun thing to do. You can just go and, you've all seen these and probably used them when you're thinking about painting your walls, and you can just get as many as you want to from Lowe's or Home Depot. They love teachers, and you can find lots of fun ways to help them. In these particular examples, we can see that we're using them with the root word, and we're using that for sort of that generative word work. We also are using them to think about synonyms and how they're not completely the same. We go from a brighter to a darker color to show the example how jubilant is a much more vibrant way to describe something than just happy. We can also use them to, for them to categorize their word definition, sentence, and picture. That's a little hard for me because I write really big, but if you get big paint chips or your kids write smaller, that can work for you. But you can think of other ways that you might incorporate just, simple little ideas like that. Then the vocabulary logs are really helping students, again, think about that, the generative vocabulary, the morphemic analysis, the friendly definition, the sentence step, and the image. So this can become like a permanent part of their that they use in these vocabulary logs so they can keep track of these words that they're learning, and that these are ways that they can go back and review and not lose these words. And then we're going to talk more in depth about word sorts. So word sorts are a great tool to help students learn vocabulary and the concepts. They're going to be comparing and contrasting and classifying words. And we can use open word sorts or a closed word sort. So for a closed sort, you provide a word bank and the categories, and the students get the words from the text. This forces them to go back and read text closely. And for open sort, you provide the words, and the students create their own categories. And so we're going to take a look at both of those types. So in a closed word sort, and again, many of you have probably done these before, or maybe you do them now. So this might be a review for you, but let's have just a little bit of practice on this. We're going to take a turn and do a closed sort. So if you look at page 7 in your viewing guide, we are going to read the text on page 7. And when you're done, you'll see the word bank provided just below the text, merchant, spices, etc. And I want you to think about and discuss and sort these words with your partner. It's important to know these words can actually go in more than one category. So you can use some of these words multiple times. So take about 2 minutes to read the text and 1 or 2 minutes more to sort the words. So I'm going to bring you back in 4 minutes, which is going to seem like a long time for me sitting here in silence, but I know that you're going to be having great discussions and talking about this categorization. So I'll bring you back in about 4 minutes. Okay, let's come back together. Hopefully you had a lot of great discussions and thinking about where you might categorize these words. Your word sort might look something like this. It could look a little bit differently if you had different thoughts about it, as long as you could support those ideas. We know that Marco Polo was navigator, explorer, merchant, persistent. Also that con was also persistent. We might have exotic and with con and with the traded items. And so just great ways for kids to be digging deeper into the text, thinking about and categorizing some of these vocabulary words. We can also use these as a guide for our discussions and also to think about writing about the concept. In addition to the closed sorts like this, we can do open sorts. And in the open sort, we're going to provide the word box, but not the categories. So I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes to work on an open sort. And as you're working on it, I want you to really think about why you categorize the words the way that you did. Think about your students and keep in mind what they might be doing or thinking about these as well. And know that all categories are acceptable as long as students can explain why. Okay, we want to make sure that we're circulating and that we're correcting any kind of misconception or anything like that. But as long as kids can substantiate why they're doing that, all categories will be okay. So in this particular one, we're going to look at this word sort on page 8 of your viewing guide. And these are the words. And I want you to put them into categories. And there are room here for 4 categories. Maybe you only come up with 3. Maybe you have 5. Again, these things are all going to be fine as long as you substantiate them. So take just about 60 seconds to decide on some categories and sort these terms into those categories. Okay, let's come back together. And let's think about how you sorted them. You might have done something differently. In this particular way, I sorted them in plant life, mammals, shellfish, or exoskeleton, which is another great word for morphemic analysis, and fish, okay? So again, it's about the process, it's about the discussion, it's about thinking deeply about these words. So when we're thinking about us as teachers, you need to think about what are all the things you needed to know and be able to do to sort these words. It's pretty sophisticated and really deep work with these words. And also really how these sorts are really going to increase kids' word consciousness and really digging deep and having fun with words. So in step 5, we're still in this 6-step process. We really want our students to talk more and make presentations. We're going to be thinking about accomplish. Did we already do this? We already did this. I have this in here twice. So we're going to ignore that part. We already did accomplish and crumbling. Somehow I put that in there twice. So that's the part right there where we're going to be really having kids use those words, thinking about them, discussing them, and digging deeper into those making meanings. So when we come back to those original list of words, remember we chose of potential words that we might teach out of that first text that we looked at. We talked about using paleontologist. So going back to that word paleontologist, we could have students engage in activities such as these, pretending they're a paleontologist. Would you like to study paleontology? And we're going deeper again. If you became a paleontologist, what would you do for work? Would you like to study paleontology? Why or why not? Start with this sentence stem. I would or would not like to study paleontology because. And then even more sophisticated, why would a paleontologist be interested in geology? So now we've got two of those big hard words in there for kids to be really deepening their understanding and applying these words in discussion. And in step 6, when we're reviewing and doing revisiting words, these can look like a million different ways. And I know you have tons of them, whether you use bingo games or matching or fun interactive things. There's a couple just here on this slide. Word watch is one where we're really encouraging kids to actually use the words in their everyday conversations or in their everyday writing that they're doing. And we can just keep a tally. Oh, I heard Johnny used the word accomplish. And so we're going to chart that. And we can, make it as a contest, which word did we use the most this week, or which word was the most useful for our writing, or which word was more useful across different contexts. So we teach kids that actually too, that some of these words we're going to use a lot in a lot of different ways, and some of these are just really specific to this unit that we're studying now. Just simple games, whether you have, like I said, whatever kind of games that you already have in your classroom. This one is just an oops and yay, so we're just really practicing sight words as well as the definition. So this is kind of a basic level, not going real deep. So it's just kind of making sure we're keeping those words in our sight words and in our vocabulary. All right, so now we looked at the 6th step. That's one way. Now we're just going to look at another way that's just a real quick way to introduce some words. Now this is going to provide that student-friendly definition, an image, the word in context, the synonym, the synonym, gestures, examples, non-examples, student discussion, but just in a real quick way. So we're just talking about this is going to be 60 seconds, 90 seconds, a real quick way just to introduce. Now, again, when we think about going deep and lots of multiple encounters, this is not going to be the only thing we do, but this is one technique we can use. So in this particular teaching routine, which is on page 11, sorry, I skipped, you can see that on 9 and 10 were some of those others that we just talked about. On page 11 is just this real quick direct teaching routine. It includes many of the elements of effective instruction that we talked about, the modeling, guided practice, student practice. So students also are going to be turning to a partner, making connections, and this routine encompasses not only the vocabulary instruction, but also the oral language, because students are actually going to be speaking, they're going to be repeating. And the success of this is really in that it provides multiple practice and multiple meanings of a representation in just a real small amount of time. So again, this wouldn't be all of your vocabulary instruction, but just another piece to add. Before you do this, so let me just go through this real quick. In step 1, you're going to read the word by parts. So that's that introduction of the word. Yes, the word is, it means this. And we're going to do flip-flop, and I'm going to explain that here in a second. Listen to the sentence, another way of saying, and so this makes more sense on the next 2 slides, so I'm going to go ahead. What you're going to need to determine beforehand is, again, that student-friendly definition. So we're going to look at that word accomplish that we identified previously. So accomplish means to get things done, to achieve. I have an image here of a guy who just, won a big cup for something, soccer, maybe he's a soccer guy or he's a professional, just won an award. My sentence is, no one expected Mary to accomplish what she did. Example and non-example, would someone sleeping all day accomplish much? Yes, no, and why? Would an award-winning research scientist accomplish much? Yes, no, and why? A gesture, this particular one, it probably makes a gesture real easy if we're throwing our hands up in the air or some way that we are showing that we accomplished our dreams. Turning to our partner, we can use the word accomplish. What is something you want to accomplish in your lifetime? And then what's the word and what does it mean? So just a real quick intro, and then moving on to actually teaching it. So here's an example. I'll be the teacher and you repeat the words in blue. That's the student part. So you be the student, I'll be the teacher. We'll I'll do the blue too because I can't really hear you. So let's read this word by parts. Accomplish. Now read it fast. What word? Accomplish. Accomplish. Yes, this word is accomplish. What word? Yes, accomplish. Accomplish means to achieve. What does accomplish mean? Achieve. Yes, achieve. Now we're going to do flip-flop. So flip-flop just means we're going to flip the achieve and the accomplish, basically, okay? So now we're going to say, and what's another way of saying achieve? Accomplish. Yes, accomplish. So listen to this sentence. No one expected Mary to accomplish what she did. What's another way of saying no one expected Mary to accomplish what she did? Yes, no one expected Mary to achieve what she did. Now we're going to flip-flop again. What's another way of saying no one expected Mary to achieve what she did? Yes, no one expected Mary to accomplish what she did. Okay, so just real quick and just less than a minute there, we've said the word in the definition, we've used it repeatedly, we've given a non-example and an example. Just a real quick introduction. Again, this isn't going to be the meat of your vocabulary instruction, but this can be a way to just quickly introduce one or quickly teach one of those words that you don't want to spend a lot of time on, that you just want to spend a little bit of time on and make sure kids understand real quickly. I don't think accomplish would be one of those because that's probably a word we really want kids to know. All right, so our direct teaching routine. Let's try it again. Let's read this word by parts. Enormous. What word? Enormous. Yes, this word is enormous. What word, everyone? Enormous. Enormous means very large. What does enormous mean? Very large. Now we flip-flop. What does very large mean? Enormous. Listen to this sentence. An elephant is enormous. What's another way of saying an elephant is enormous? An elephant is very large. Now we'll flip-flop. What's another way of saying an elephant is very large? An elephant is enormous. Show me your enormous arms. Tell your partner something that is enormous in this school. Could an ant be enormous? Why or why not? So we see just a real simple routine that we can use really easily. And I'm going to show you on the next page. It's going to be your turn to practice this with the word ferocious. And the really cool thing about this particular little instructional routine is you can just have this little sentence frame here for you, like up on your board or on the wall, and you can just throw any word in there. I mean, you have to have your sentence thought of and those things that you can jot down ahead of time, but you can use this frame to guide teaching lots and lots of words. So let's try it. We're going to take turns. We're going to practice this routine with a partner for the word ferocious. Each of you take turn being the teacher. And we're going to try to do this in a minute. Okay, so each of you has a minute. So we're going to come back together in 2 minutes. Okay, I'm going to interrupt you now because I was just told that our time is up, and I can't even believe it's 4:45 already, and I have so much more for you, and I just don't even know how that time went by so quickly. So I'm just going to try to wrap things up real quick here and just tell you what else is in the PowerPoint that you can go back to later. The next slide actually hold on, let me get there. We weren't going to be able to do anyway because we realized in the WebEx that this video doesn't show very well. Her mouth doesn't, the voice doesn't match what she's coming out of her mouth, that kind of thing. So I've put the link here so that you can download this and watch this vocabulary instruction in action. And there is a video tool for you on page 13 of your viewing guides. So you can look at this instructional routine through that lens that we had before. The majority of the rest of it that we were going to be talking about were going to be the word-rich environments and multiple instruction and independent word learning strategies, focusing on word consciousness and the generative vocabulary. So these things are so incredibly important, and I'm sorry that we have run out of time, but we do want to stop here and just see if you had questions. And again, I apologize that I don't think we could have gone any faster than we did. So it's not that, but I just want to stop here and see if you have questions. And I do want to remind you that you have lots of great, in addition to the PowerPoint that we're going to send you, you have lots of great strategies in your ReadyGen handbook.
So what? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have a question they would like to ask, or are you all filing out on me? Thank you.
Dirty, stinky hands out of there.
Sounds like folks are packing up. They were watching the webinar in large groups at their schools.
Okay.
Just like to thank you for the time that you spent with us today, and I know it was valued by our teachers and by our instructional coaches and also by our department. And so we will.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry we had so much packed in, and we just need about 2 more hours.
I know there's never enough time. We appreciate your support, and as always, we are just so happy to work with everybody at PCG, and
we're so happy to work with you. Thank you so much.
all right, take care. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.